That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. That's a good step. Yep. About a 3-footer.
Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you we say, we've only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
One of truth's protective layers.
You are about to embark on a one-way journey to the greatest lie ever told. The launch pad for our expedition is the site of a Cold War-era nuclear missile base that was covertly hidden beneath the ground in Old Bridge, New Jersey. Underground silos stored the Nike Hercules nuclear warhead, and the residents of this sleepy town had no idea it was even there, for this was an age of great secrets. We are looking at a phenomenon now called colored banding, and I've taken this all from Apollo 16 footage. You can see that every time something goes by the camera lens quickly with any pace to it, it gets this colored banding on it. And that goes for shadows as well. And I'm going to slow it down here so you can see when the shadow is created, the colored banding happens, and that's a freeze frame of the color banding around the shadow. This is Station 2, Apollo 16, and just get a perspective for how far the astronaut on the right is. And the camera we're watching this through is the color TV camera on the rover, which is controlled from Houston. And note the light source in the visor of the astronaut walking by. And now we're going to cut a little further in this clip. Pay attention to what happens.
Just a very pressy sight as far as the boulder goes. They're all angular. Just a very pressy sight as far as the boulder goes. They're all angular.
What you're looking at are shadows covering the entire location out to the horizon. I'm showing you the same clip, and there are two shadows. 1, 2. That is impossible with the sun as the light source. The only way this could be possible is if it's an artificial light source, because there's nothing tall enough there to block out that much space. And I showed you how far the astronaut is from the rover, and these shadows are covering the entire location. And this is black and white normal speed. See his backpack? Light, shadow. Okay, now let's take one black and white, slow down. Also note that the image is shaking because the other astronaut is at the rover. It's as if something has fallen across the light source, causing fast-moving shadows. The banding reads on the back of the astronaut's backpack, but it doesn't read in the black zone because the lens only puts banding on things it can read, and it can't read a shadow in the darkness. If the light source is the sun, how do you block out the sun with two guys on the moon? How do you block it out? You can't block out the sun for that long of a shadow. Astronaut Charlie Duke is out there in the distance. Astronaut John Young is back by the rover. So who's causing the shadows? This is a diagram of the MESA table, which sits on the lunar surface in front of the lunar module. At the bottom, that rectangular bag is called the equipment transfer bag, and that is the thing we are going to be paying attention to in this clip. Now, on the right, you'll see the other astronaut, and he's moving away from the ship, and he's fooling around with the UV camera. The astronaut in front of you is about to turn and go back towards the MESA table and the equipment transfer bag, and when he does, on the right, you'll see the equipment transfer bag swinging. It's just swinging back and forth, and it's going at about the same pace. It shows no sign of the momentum slowing down. It's just going back and forth as if some sort of vent is blowing on it. But there's nothing that can be blowing on it if that's the moon. Because on the moon, there is no atmosphere, there's no wind, there's no air, there's no breeze that can be blowing that. This clip is from the closeout of EVA-1, Apollo 16, and the next clip is from the closeout of EVA-3, also Apollo 16. And we're going to see the same phenomenon with the equipment transfer bag. As soon as astronaut Charlie Duke attaches it to the MESA table, it starts swinging on its own again, as if it was being installed right over a vent. But then it gets really interesting because I think they notice it and they discuss it and then take corrective actions.
Hey, John? Yeah? Take a look. No.
Okay, Charlie, you should have... Charlie, you should have 7 Hasselblads and 3...
Now you're going to see Charlie Duke take corrective action. He's going to walk over to the swinging ETB bag. He's going to remove the camera that's attached to his chest. He's going to put it on top of the MESA table, and then he's going to put his camera in the ETB bag, and then he's going to remove the bag from the straps, and he's going to place it on top of the MESA table so it's no longer swinging from the straps. And there's obviously a voice we can't hear organizing the charade-like diversion you are about to see.
Where's the bag that the good old UV? Hey, Charlie, did you throw my camera away? No, I didn't throw your camera away. Where is it? Over there? Yeah. Okay. The bag that the what?
The bag that the what? He's obviously hearing a voice we can't hear who's telling him what to do. This is just a really strange scene. Now watch as he walks away. You'll see he no longer has the camera. You can't have any wind or breeze or ventilation on the moon. But this thing is like a perpetual motion machine. And this is how they corrected that motion, by taking it off the straps and putting it on top of the table. Okay, now let's go back to the first clip from EVA-1 again, and you see the bag swinging on the right. I'm revisiting this not so much to look at the bag, but that strap in the right-hand corner that hangs down from the ship. Keep your eyes on that strap because it's about to get hit by an object.
What are we going to do with this thing? Can we throw it away? Leave it under the... Throw it away, it's empty. Pull it straight up, there you go. That crummy thing. Well, hell, that's okay. Good. Oh.
So the strap was hit with momentum, but it exhausts the momentum and it slows down and it practically comes to a complete pause. And that's the reason I'm showing you this, to illustrate the fact that You can see momentum acting naturally in this clip. Let's take another look at it. But notice how that strap responds to gravity and responds to the momentum dissipating, whereas the ETB bag does not. It goes at a steady pace throughout both clips from EVA1 and EVA3. The logical question that comes to mind is whether some mechanism on the ship, some motorized mechanism, vibration, or exhaust is somehow blowing the bag, and the answer is no. The bag hangs from the mesa table. The mesa table is simply a table that holds supplies and equipment for the extravehicular activity. The bag, as you can see, just hangs down from the table. And as we take a look at the Apollo 16 summary at nasa.gov, quote, because the LM had remained in lunar orbit 6 hours longer than planned, the LM was powered down to conserve electrical power. So that rules out the possibility that the bag is swinging from any kind of vibration caused from the power of the ship. Everything they put in the ETB is supposed to go back to the ship for transfer to Earth, and the 70mm Hasselblad camera is not on that list. Furthermore, it is common knowledge, also listed in the lunar surface procedures, that the 70mm Hasselblad cameras were left on the moon. Charlie Duke was responsible for attaching the ETB by the straps to the SRC table at the mesa. It specifically says the ETB is supposed to hang from that table. Charlie Duke is not supposed to touch that bag again or have anything to do with it for the rest of the mission until they are back in the lunar module. John Young has the responsibility of taking that thing off the straps and attaching it to the conveyor when he is entering the lunar module, and then the procedure calls for Charlie Duke to unhook it at that point.
Hey, Charlie, did you throw my camera away? No, I didn't throw your camera away. Where is it? Over there? Yeah. Okay. The bag that the what?
What's going on right now with him removing the bag and then putting it on top of the table is a total break with protocol, and any break with protocol is by definition a contingency plan, and that's why Charlie Duke and John Young seem so confused in this scene.
We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 Hasselblads, 3 DACs, SWC, and a CRE. The maps, various other things.
Various other things. The problem with various other things is that various other things are not listed on the lunar surface procedures. Various other things directly refers to the camera, which he just stuffed in the ETB.
Okay, let me drive this up the hill. Okay.
This is a lie. You are looking at a series of photos taken from EVA3 of Apollo 16. Every photo in this magazine is completely ruined by these smudges you see. At the bottom of the images, the number 39, that identifies the camera these were taken with. There were 2 cameras used for 70mm shots during Apollo 16, number 39 and number 33. Those numbers are etched on the resu plate, which is a glass plate that faces the film. It's in between the lens and the film, and it has these crosshairs on it, and it also has the identification number on the bottom of the resu plate. All of the damaged photographs were taken with number 39. 162 photos on magazine 116E, and there are some other damaged photographs with this exact same pattern on magazine 114B. So you've been looking at the cover of the Apollo 16 technical debrief document, and I want to draw your attention to the commentary on this issue. Quote, "The cameras worked nominally, even though we got them real dusty, and it was hard to see the setting after the EVAs. We wiped them down with a wet cloth inside and changed the film outside. Not only that, I guess according to the photo guys, we got some dust inside on the residue. The camera still worked, although it left a couple or 3 streaks across the film." Notice what John Young says about the photo guys. This raises an important point. We'll digress for a second to discuss one of the main defenses that people make to show or argue that we had to have gone to the moon. And they often say that there would have been so many people involved in the conspiracy it would have been impossible to keep it quiet. The only people who would have known about the hoax would have been those on a need-to-know basis, and that would have been very few people. You have your astronauts, you have the people filming everything and building the locations, and you have the people authorizing it, and that's it. Everybody else would have been doing their one task in the line and sequence of events that they were responsible for. And this segues into another defense made by people who believe we went to the moon, and that is, why didn't NASA have them do things over after they made mistakes? And the reason for that is that this was live, and not everybody was in on it, and those hundreds of people you see at Mission Control, they're not in on it. You got the surgeons, they're monitoring the heart rate. You have the data guys, they're monitoring whatever is coming in on their feed. And everybody is looking at a live event, and all over the world people are monitoring a live event. So there were no do-overs. Going back to what John Young said, by way of illustration about the photo guys would have received the film. The film couldn't be developed on the moon. It had a chain of custody. That had to take place, and those guys were not in on it. Now this is the cover of Apollo 16 mission report, and let's go to the equipment section. Paragraph D, the residue plate on the lunar module pilot's 70mm electric data camera was smeared during a magazine change between extravehicular activities 2 and 3. Charlie Duke indicates that they wiped the residue plates down with a wet cloth inside the cabin in between the EVAs. When they were done with their work on the moon, they would go back into the lunar module, seal the hatch, repressurize the cabin, and camp out for the night until the next day, when they would continue the mission on the second EVA and then the third EVA. Now let's take a look at the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal, and they are taking their cue from the debrief and from the mission report. In the brackets, their explanation states, each frame on magazine 116E shows a set of smudges. Detail of the smudge pattern change only slowly from the beginning of the magazine to the end. The smudges are undoubtedly the result of contact of a dust-laden, damp cloth with the residue plate in John's camera. So NASA, the astronauts, and the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal all march in lockstep, alleging that the stain happened inside the cabin in between EVA 2 and 3. This is because the surface of the moon is a near vacuum, and all moisture and liquid would boil immediately in the vacuum of space. And indeed, this entire story is a complete fiction. It's a fraud and it's a lie, and NASA knows absolutely with 100% certainty exactly when that smudging happened, and it did not happen in between EVA2 and EVA3 inside the cabin of the lunar module. It did not happen then. Furthermore, the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal is absolutely wrong in its assertion that this smudging happened as the result of contact with a damp, dust-laden cloth. And what you see is the familiar splash pattern of a spill. Something was spilled on the camera. This is a picture of the index for Apollo 16 from the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal at nasa.gov. And when you come to Geology Station 8, you'll see below that traversed Station 9, and instead of Geology Station 9, it says the Great Sneak. And when you click the Great Sneak, it brings you to Geology Station 9. And this is where the magazine change happens.
Did he say both change? Yeah. Okay. Tony, I don't have a black and white left. I'm going to run off a couple, John. Okay. I'm out. 3 frames to go and I'm out.
Okay.
Okay, magazine, Bravo's got something in it. A few frames. You used about 50 on it yesterday, and we can use magazine Delta. Both put color on. Is that okay, Tony?
Okay, that sounds fine. Let's put Bravo on John since he doesn't shoot while he's driving.
And here are the final 3 shots taken with 107C directly at Station 9 during EVA2. And these are not marked by the smudges. Concluding that magazine at Station 9, none of them are marked by the smudges. They are absolutely perfect.
Which one, Charlie? Delta for me and Bravo for you. Bravo. Right in the corner there. Set marks.
The image you are looking at now was the very last picture taken before that magazine change at Station 9 where they are now. This is 107-17583, and as you can see, there are no smudges on it. The very next picture taken with that camera is after the swap of magazines, and this is now 114-18444. And that photo was on magazine 114B. On the left, we have 18444, the very first image taken with the smudges. And you can see the pattern is clear, the dust has not grabbed to it yet. On the right is 18577, and this one was taken the next day during EVA3. Compare the 2 stains. The streaks are the same. These are the same exact patterns. The orange juice dried, and it's stained in the same way. The streaks match. See the first long streak on the left, and then look to the right image, and that same long streak is there, and it becomes obvious that this is a spill pattern of orange juice spilled on the glass that persisted over 2 days. Every single photograph taken with camera 39 up until this moment at Station 9 during EVA2 was absolutely perfect, and every single photograph taken with that camera from this moment on will be absolutely smudged. If the astronauts had wiped the cameras down with a damp cloth inside the cabin later that evening, we would not see the stain pattern the next day during EVA3. And this is the moment that it happens. John Young drops his sample bags, and Charlie Duke comes over to help him reattach them to his camera, and John Young asks Charlie Duke to check his lens, and since we know that the very next picture snapped with that camera will have the familiar stain pattern on it, John Young's concern with his lens leads us to another possibility that the stain pattern is on the lens and not the res-out plate.
Dropped your bags again, John. Yeah, tape came off, Charlie. Oh, that thing did come off, didn't it? Yeah. Okay, let me come around and help you put it on. Okay? Yeah. Well, the tape's still there. This thing just peeled off front of the the tape. Oh, boy, almost. Only happens in training. You got it. How's my lens? Turn into the sun. Okay. But your finger. It's okay. Plain to see that.
So what has just happened to cause this stain pattern to emerge? The answer is orange juice. It has been well documented that the astronauts had a problem with the suction straws inside their helmets that allowed them to take sips of orange juice. The straws would accidentally squirt orange juice all over them and into their helmets, and this was a big problem on the mission, and the orange juice actually seeped into the neck ring. And it appears obvious now that the orange juice leaked through the neck ring at Station 9 and caused the camera to be stained. And that is direct evidence that they could not possibly be on the moon, because if orange juice could leak through the helmet lock, then the helmet lock was not properly sealed to protect the astronauts from the vacuum of space. And this is because the helmet and the neck ring, in order to be airtight, must also have been watertight, because water molecules are bigger than air molecules. So if water escaped, then oxygen also escaped, and the suit would not have been pressurized, and in that case, the astronauts would be dead.
To better understand the purpose of a lunar spacesuit, let's let our friend Andy Astronaut demonstrate the hazards lunar explorers will encounter. If Andy were to step out on the surface of the moon without a spacesuit, this is what would happen. In the near vacuum of space, the gases within his body would immediately expand. His blood would appear to boil from the rapid expansion of gases coming out of solution in his bloodstream. And he would soon feel the effects of another condition of space, lack of oxygen. After 20 seconds in a vacuum and without oxygen, Andy would be trading in his astronaut wings for a more permanent variety.
Okay, now let's go back to the Apollo 16 technical air-to-ground voice transcription. Charlie Duke says, "Okay, Houston, do you read us? Over." "Yeah, we read you fine, Charlie." And then Charlie Duke says, "Okay, we had one heck of a time getting our helmets off. It turns out that this orange juice is the best cement you've ever seen. It seeped down in between the seals and the helmet and the ring, and we couldn't get the thing unlocked without a great effort."
Christmas, 1968, when man first cut the silver cord of Earth's gravity to orbit the moon.
In the year 1675, Sir Isaac Newton was asked by his fellow scientist, Robert Hooke, how he had accomplished so much. "If I have seen further," Newton wrote, "it is by standing on the shoulders of giants."
First stage propellant tanks have been pressurized. The engines will build up to a thrust of 7.6 million pounds. T-minus 30 seconds. We have a cutoff.
May 18th, 1969. We were almost ready. Man had orbited the moon once. Man had test-flown the lunar module, the lunar landing craft, in Earth orbit once. But before we would commit men to a lunar landing, there were still a number of things to be worked out. This was the mission of Apollo 10. In the words of its commander, Tom Stafford, to sort out all the unknowns and pave the way for a lunar landing.
In the first three segments, I'm quite certain about the conclusions that have been drawn, and we will return to the heavy artillery in the final segment. But for this segment, I want to sort out a few unknowns. And these are pieces of information that I've discovered which are of peculiar interest to the entire moon hoax culture. Now, I am not the first to suggest there's some sort of Geppetto character in the rafters above, pulling the astronauts by some sort of harness with fishing wire. Like, why does Charlie Duke want John Young to push on his head here?
Oops, here we go again. Give me a help. There you go. Okay, just push, start pushing on my head. Give me a hand. Okay, here we go.
So he pushes down on his head and his feet seem to levitate backwards. Now check this out. They appear to be jumping about 5 feet in the air.
We were going to do a bunch of exercise that we had made up as the Lunar Olympics. Show you what a guy could do on the moon with a backpack on. But
for a 380-pound guy, that's pretty good.
They threw that out. Yeah, jump flat-footed, straight in the air. 300, about 4 feet. Wow! Charlie, that ain't any fun, is it? That ain't very smart.
Okay, I don't claim to have found the wires, but I do think I found the attachment to the wires. This is the OPS, oxygen purge system. The arrows are pointing at those little bars there. Those bars were originally designed to carry a bag on them, but the only mission they actually used the bag was Apollo 12. And here you can see the strap from the bag attaches to the top of the backpack on that bar. And even though they didn't use that bar for anything else on later missions, the bar remained part of the equipment. What is not part of the equipment and has never been spotted before, as far as my research has revealed, is that there are little tiny rings that hang out of that bar compartment. And I could only spot these in this one clip from Apollo 16 at Station 5. But in this clip, you can see them quite clearly, and you can see them dangling, and you can see the shadow that they make. And there is no official explanation for those rings. And this in a mission that has been analyzed to the nines. No technical manual, no internet discussion, no mission report mentions these rings. And if there were wires carrying the astronauts around and making them do all these herky-jerky moments and jump up in the air 5 feet straight and lope around the so-called lunar surface, then the wires were attached to these little rings. So we pick up the action on EVA-3, Apollo 16, and the astronauts have just returned from House Rock, which is that big rock they were gallivanting in the beginning of this segment. Charlie Duke is switching magazines in the 16mm movie camera, which is at the top right of the screen. He's turning it now. Watch his visor, because I believe you are going to see an artificial light source flicker on and off very quickly. At first you will see the light travel up his uniform, and then it will flash on in his visor, and then it will flash off. Boom, there it goes. Now, NASA's official position is that there were no artificial lights used on the surface of the moon. The astronauts were issued flashlights, but they were only used inside the ships. Here is a picture of the actual flashlight used by John Young during this mission.
That's a better size one.
Watch the beam of light travel up the spacesuit. It will go on his left shoulder and then swing over towards his right shoulder, under his chin, and right up into the visor. There, you just saw it again, and now we're going to watch it in slow motion. Just look to the right of the arrows, keep your eye below the visor, and watch the beam of light. There it is, and then into the visor. Boom. The light source is below the horizon. It's coming from underneath the shot, not above it. It's not the sun. It's an artificial light. The light flashes on beneath the rest of the scenery. In every other shot, you see the sun must be at the top of the visor. On the left, the light source is below the scenery, and on the right, it's at the top of the visor where it is in every other shot. To my eye, it looks like a hidden flashlight in the fingers of the glove. In the Gemini missions, that was actually something they did have, but in the Apollo missions, they did not have, according to the official record, finger lights. And the big question here is why he would need a flashlight if that were in fact the blinding sun behind him. The official flashlights were 5¼ inches long, and here's a picture of Charlie Duke playing with one on board. That flashlight was clearly not in his hand in the previous clip.
I thought that thing hadn't run, Tony, but the little ball had just stuck. Whew.
Okay, understand.
Oh, John. What was it?
I love that guy in the background going, what just happened? Now I want to take a look at a photo we've already seen before, and this is from Station 9 at the infamous magazine change. And look at John Young's left leg. It appears there is a slit in his pants, and a pen light is shining fluorescently right out of it. While we are taking this pleasant little journey across the so-called lunar surface, I just want to take a moment to actually praise the astronauts involved with the Apollo missions and all astronauts to strap themselves to these rockets in the Cold War on a mission to try and change the world, to try and inspire the world, and to try and avoid a real war. This was an attempt to project technological superiority, and if it could be done without firing a shot, then great, more power to them. And the astronauts have my utmost respect, and it really makes me mad when I see some of the other hoax researchers harassing the astronauts. These guys were operating in a chain of command during the Cold War, and they deserve our respect and gratitude.
You see, the vibration of my voice box makes the air vibrate between us. Then when the air vibrates your eardrum, you hear what I'm saying. But maybe you've seen a demonstration of a bell under a glass jar. With normal air inside the jar, you could hear the bell clearly. But when the vacuum pump drew the air out of the jar, there was nothing inside to carry the vibrations of the bell. Nothing until the air was let back into the jar.
They can't get your photo numbers. And this is core tube number 2. Okay, you're almost driving without a hammer. But if you'll hand it to me, I'll get it in a second. I'm going to take a couple more shots of this before we leave. Get all in, I get the pictures. Alright? Driving in real easy, Houston.
The sounds in space, it's odd to have a hammer or a metal tool and bang it against something and hear absolutely nothing. You can, sound won't travel in a vacuum, so there you are outside and you could be hitting something, no sound at all.
In space, since there's no atmosphere, there's no air, if you bang on something when you're doing your spacewalk, you will not be able to hear that.
And this leads us to the dilemma of our final segment. All modern astronauts, such as Piers Sellers and Mike Massimino, claim to hear absolutely nothing when they're out on the International Space Station in the vacuum, banging away with metal tools and objects, whereas during the Apollo missions, all kinds of sounds have been recorded that should not be possible if they are on the moon in the vacuum of space.
This is Mission Control Houston. We want to welcome you to NASA Television's live coverage from the International Space Station Flight Control Room as we get ready for another spacewalk by the crew of Expedition.
Okay, copy.
Notice the complete silence during this modern EVA at the International Space Station. If the astronauts aren't speaking, you hear dead silence.
And I show the arm is safe. Copy, thank you. Good.
The major difference between the Apollo missions and modern spacewalks, such as you just saw at the International Space Station, is that when the astronauts are working on the space station out in space in a true vacuum, when they are not transmitting directly through their mics with their voices, you hear dead silence. In the Apollo missions, you can hear all kinds of sounds. The sound of 2 very hard hammer blows transmitted through Dave's gloves into the suit and to his microphone can be heard between his grunts. And we return to the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal, which more and more begins to look like damage control and misdirection. And here is what they have to say about the Apollo 17 hammering. The last paragraph there at the bottom. What seems likely is that when Gene hits the rock, the hammer rebounds against the palm of the pressurized glove, creating a sound wave in the suit loud enough to be picked up by the microphone at Gene's lips. In brief, the suit acts like a drum. But the suit never acts like a drum at the International Space Station, where we are about to watch an astronaut use a power tool.
All right, buddy, we're going to stop at 20 turns.
Understand, we have a go?
Affirm.
All right, here it comes.
Total, utter silence, which is exactly what you are supposed to get if you are in the vacuum of space, and it is exactly what you get in all modern spacewalks. Now let's return to Apollo 12.
Okay, you're almost driving without a hammer. But if you hand it to me, I'll get it in a second. I'm going to take a couple more shots of this before we leave. Get all in, I get the pictures. Alright? Driving in real easy, Houston.
That does not sound like the spacesuit acting like a drum at all. It sounds like a metal hammer striking a metal object repeatedly with authority. Pictured is Alan Bean during Apollo 12 striking a metal core tube into the so-called lunar surface with a metal hammer. This is an interview with Apollo astronauts Alan Bean and Pete Conrad done by the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal. They are once again taking the position that the sound is coming through the hand and transmitting into the microphones in the helmet. Alan Bean says, "I would have said it wasn't possible," and Pete Conrad responds, "The other guy can't hear it." If the sound is coming through Alan Bean's microphone, then like his voice, it must be transmitted directly into the headset of Pete Conrad, so his statement makes no sense. Alan Bean's statement makes a lot of sense, since it would not have been possible in a vacuum. When Bean says, "I would have said it wasn't possible," he has science on his side. And he also has NASA on his side, at least up until August 19th, 2011. And this brings us to the most important graphic in the film. This is a web page that has been disappeared from the internet by NASA as of August 2011. It was at nasa.gov, running concurrently with the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal between 2009 and September 2011. However, this page, which was created for children, you can see the banner at the top, Lunar Science for Kids. This page directly contradicts the assertions made in the Apollo Lunar Surface Journal concerning the hammering sounds in Apollo 12, 15, and 17. This page talks about the science involved with sound on the moon, and it does so correctly. And that is why NASA has disappeared it from the web. The contradiction between the journal and this page was brought up in the very popular Moon Zoo forum. And that is where I first became aware of the situation. Reader Tom128 pointed out the contradiction between the site for children and the journal. And I went looking for the site for children and could not find it. I then went to my favorite research tool, the Wayback Machine at archive.org, and I was able to find an old version of the page that NASA did not clean up. And whenever I see information go missing from the web, it always starts me thinking, and this was the genesis of the film. At that moment, I became a NASA moon hoax researcher. You've seen the image on the right of the graphic before. That is Alan Bean hammering a core tube during Apollo 12, and this is the sound of such hammering. The graphic is problematic for NASA because of the contradiction to the journal, and the graphic is correct science. And I quote, "Sound needs something to travel through to get from one place to another. On the moon, since there is no air, sound cannot travel above the surface. So, there are no sounds on the surface of the moon. When the Apollo astronauts were out on the moon's surface, they could only talk to each other and to mission control by using the radios in their air-filled helmets. Even when the astronaut in the photo to the right hit a metal tube into the ground with a hammer, no sound was made." All of the sounds so far analyzed were made by the astronauts as they were handling tools, but now we are going to analyze some sounds that are made a distance away from the astronauts. So what you just saw appears to be a smoking gun. That scene, which was broadcast live to the world during Apollo 15, shows astronaut James Irwin. He takes this cord or band off of a canister, and those canisters are in the mesa table, which Irwin is standing in front of. He unravels the cord, which has two metallic locks at the end of it, pictured here. They look like bullets. He takes that off, he unravels it, he reaches back with his right hand, and he throws the cord away. Let's take another look at it. So the argument has been made for the hammering that the sound is coming through the glove and it's miraculously getting into the microphones. But we don't have to deal with that argument because James Irwin releases the object and it hits the ship and he's not touching it, and that sound is picked up by the microphone inside the astronaut's helmet. And you can always tell that that's the microphone in play because you will always hear the sound of the suit air supply system in the background whenever the astronaut is transmitting, and you will hear this sound remain on for a split second after the astronaut stops transmitting. Both the outside of the ship and the inside of the ship in the cabin are in the vacuum because the lunar module does not have an air hatch. So when the astronauts leave the lunar module, it is depressurized. Microphones in the lunar module plug into the audio centers. The only voice possibilities are through the use of the headsets. They took off with 6 microphones, 3 Snoopy caps. Each astronaut also had a lightweight headset at launch. While they were on the moon and the suspect audio event took place, they were wearing their Snoopy caps. Communication cables, which are the umbilical cords that the astronauts plugged into while in the lunar module, as you can see from the checklist, were stowed prior to EVA. Also, looking at the same exact checklist, we can see that the lightweight headsets were also stowed prior to EVA. So, there were no live microphones inside the cabin. So now let's take another listen, and we will slow down the audio so you can hear the air supply unit remain on for a split second after the object hits the ship. I don't believe man has landed on the moon, but the film does not prove that either way. What I believe this film proves is that aspects of the broadcasts were fraudulent. However, I think this is one of the greatest works of art ever created, if not the single greatest work of art ever made. It was a way of fighting a war without violence, a way of fighting a war, the Cold War, with art, and the people responsible for it ought to step forward and get their due. And if there are restrictions on this knowledge or the truth, they ought to be released, because as the decades go on, the truth will become more and more clear, and the charade will become more and more exposed. I have only analyzed about 20% of the footage, and I hope that we do see the architects of this incredible work of art come forward.